Monson with Rural Ruckus Radio and Podcast. I'm your host today, and we have another special guest once again with an organization helping to sponsor Rural Ruckus Radio and Podcast, the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, and we have Benya Cross with us today. I'm looking forward to talking to her, getting to know her. She succeeds Tim Penny, who has been a guest on this show and a longtime friend and partner of me and Compeer, where I used to work. And we're going to get to talk to Benya today to learn a little bit more about what took her to this role, but learn more about her and maybe more of the stories behind some of the things she's beginning to see and develop as she's working through her new position, as well as looking into the future and what that looks like for her. So Benya, thank you so much for coming onto the program today. We are so glad that you are here. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun job, isn't it?
Oh, it's been a blast already.
Yeah, you've got energy. There's no question about it. I see that right now. And we can see that there's sort of a magnetism in your smile and your personality that's going to make it easy for people to get to know you and also the Initiative Foundation if they don't already. So good. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I'm anxious to hear a lot more about you, what's driving you, and some of the stories behind it as well. So let's talk first about what happened before you got here and kind of what's gotten you to this point so far.
Yeah. Well, I'll start maybe first with where I call home, because
Okay,
I think
that's
at the
fair.
heart of what Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation is, right? Like, we're here to serve our home. So, and I call home both this mix of Waseca, Minnesota and Bangkok, Thailand. So, you know, the usual sister city relationship.
Right.
My dad's side of the family is about 6th generation now farmers in Waseca County. And he grew up as one of 9 on the family farm. My mom also grew up in agriculture, but in northern Thailand. So a little different climate. And I was born in Thailand. My dad ended up doing international health work overseas, and actually went to St. Mary's Seminary down in Winona. So also have a Southeast connection too, but then that took him actually internationally to the Thai-Cambodia refugee border, and met my mom while she was in university, and then they had me and my brother. But so I spent most of my life growing up in Thailand, but would always spend my summers and Christmases as a kid on our family farm.
Interesting.
So I was often the city slicker cousin that would just get, told to do the chores that none of my other cousins wanted to do because I didn't know better. But just spent just so many great memories as a kid, loving and being part of Waseca. But it wasn't really until college that I became this person who wanted to live a rural life. I was studying actually international relations at a school out in Boston. I thought I was going to have this career trajectory of joining the Foreign Service and moving every 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
And I had a summer situation with my family bring me back to Waseca, and I remember just going on these 4-wheeler rides with my Uncle Paul. And hearing the story of just how our family got here, how the legacy of stewardship that my grandpa Jim had, how we protected and stewarded the wetlands in our area. And I began, I think, to, now as a young adult who could actually hear the stories that I had grown up hearing and have them have some sort of effect on me. And I think I started wondering, is life really about how much you get out of a place, and thinking of where you live as this like menu of options that you can take things from, or is the most meaningful thing actually to think about what you contribute to a place as well? And what I love about rural living is that there's this co-accountability, like the community supports you, rallies around you, but it also asks something of you. And I don't think as human beings we're meant to live these anonymous lives. Like, we're meant to be known. And I felt that I saw that in my family's way of life, and it made me just want to figure out how I could be part of that too. So that was my aha epiphany summer, and I went back to college to career services, and I said, hey, I want to get back to Southern Minnesota, ideally Waseca. And they looked at me and they said, we have no idea where that is. We have no connections among alumni to get you there, but we could get you to Boston, New York, DC, or San Francisco. And I ended up finding, just by way that life and fate would have it, 3 other 20-somethings at the time from Kansas, Oklahoma, and Kentucky, and myself from Minnesota. And all of us were having the same conversations in our career services and wanted to find a way to get ourselves back to our hometowns, and found that there was not a robust pipeline that got talent to come back. and also to do things around public service as well. You know, we were part of these interviews for all these fellowships that got you out of your community and sometimes out internationally, but was there a similar model that could champion and celebrate people coming back home? And so we created this nonprofit organization. It was a dorm room idea that now has turned into a national organization called Lead for America. We just graduated our 600th fellow this past summer. And it's all about trying to get talent to reinvest in their hometowns and work on challenges that their communities are facing. So I got to come back through that program and bring our model here to Minnesota. And we are now in about 45 different states with a big presence in Minnesota. But, you know, this leads me to SMIF because SMIF was one of our first funders and supporters. They actually hosted some of our fellows. Every one of the initiative foundations in the states ended up becoming a partner. So I really got to know rural Minnesota, like lots of road trips and time in my car visiting small towns all across the state and then country too. And I became just fixed with this idea of, you know, bringing talent is one piece of the puzzle, but keeping talent there also means how do you unlock and move money, also move capital to these places so that there's opportunities for them to stay. And as I'm sure you can speak to in your past role with Compeer, it's about financing that, but also investing in the business models that actually keep wealth local. And so that led me to go to business school out in Chicago. So here I am coming back to rural, and then I moved to the second biggest city in the country. Yeah. But it was with a mission to focus on how do I understand the backbone of traditional finance and understand how I can bring those systems to bear fruit for rural. And we might often, which has been the history of rural economics, had to do things a little creatively and cooperatively. And it was kind of with that mission statement that I went out to Chicago, and then I came back about a year ago, worked remotely from southern Minnesota with a national philanthropic fund that was trying to move national philanthropy to invest into rural. And then that's when this opportunity at SMIF opened. And I said, wow, this is an extension of what I love, of how do we bring people and purpose and investments to rural, and how can I do that in my home region? So that's what has led me here.
Yeah, that's a good story. And there's no question about it that you have passion. You can see it, you can sense it, you feel it in terms of what you want to accomplish here. And you clearly come into it with a vision as well. So, but you take over an organization from Tim Penny, who was there as well. So that's a transition in and of itself too, isn't it? And in fact, you did a little bit of a road show with Tim, right? Can you talk just a little bit about what that was like before you sort of solely took over the role yourself? What was that like?
We joked that I think every succession plan needs a few hours behind the wheel with your predecessor, because I think that's when all the really fun stories come out. We visited almost all 20 counties in our region. Yeah. And we're meeting with our loan clients, our grantees, community partners. It was such a blast, and so thankful for the legacy and years of relationship building that Tim has stewarded in our region over the past. His tenure was 18 years. And I often think too, some of the best parts were the rogue trips that we would go on, you know, so we'd have to be in Wabasha by 3 p.m., but along the way we end up taking a rogue trip, not on the itinerary, and stopping at, you know, a house that Tim thinks he remembers where it is in Red Wing, which means we have often showed up in some driveways unannounced of you know, not quite the address that we were looking for, but close enough. Yeah. So it's those home visits that were also so fun too. And just to see, you know, so much of this work in rural is relational, and it's like, who do you trust? And it was, I'm just really thankful that Tim, as a, you know, seasoned, experienced leader, as part of his transition to me, was also validating who I was and extending his trust to me so that other people might, you know to come to trust and be able to see SMIF and in this new way and feel good about it too.
Yeah, I think through the leadership style that he had, I mean, he was trusted across the region, but I'm sure there was an extension of granted trust for you as a result of your succession of him and the organization he led and the team that's in place that we all know here in Southeast Minnesota. But it's also an earned process as well, isn't it? You get to know people and And so that trust is earned over time, but there's a lot granted, I think. And I think that's the part that's oftentimes not understood when there's a transition of leadership from a really credible, high-profile leader to somebody who's taking over this position. And again, with your personality and your passion, I have no doubt that trust is being earned every single day naturally without having to focus on it.
Yeah.
So how do you go about that part of leadership? I think that's a part that's not often talked about, maybe not well understood, but I think it's a really important part of the core of who you are as a leader and how you earn a leadership across a territory or a region that's new.
Yeah.
I think to some extent.
Yeah. Well, I hold these dual identities of both being a native to the region with 6 generations of roots in the region, and also a newcomer of someone who kind of came to rural Minnesota after college. I see it also reflected in my own parents, right? I've got a German ancestry. He's bald now, but used to have blonde hair, blue-eyed father, and then my mother who learned English later in life, and the first time she ever lived in the United States was when we first moved up to the East Coast in first grade, right? So, and when she was also learning how to drive, I think I was in 3rd grade until we finally stopped walking everywhere. So there's this blessing I think I have of being able to see also southern Minnesota from the lens of a native and a newcomer. And when I think about leadership transitions and how I'm trying to embody my leadership too is I think there's sometimes I have felt growing up that I was neither one or the other. And so I was like, deficient in either identity and can feel a little lost. But I think as I've grown older, I've learned to see that as this asset of I can find the interrelationship point between things that sometimes seem like paradox or things that don't fit together well. And, when I think about regional economic development, how to get, one part of our region is really focused on agriculture, another part is really focused on medicine, and another part of our region really focused on advanced manufacturing. How do you get these things that feel different from one another also to see their interdependence? And when I think of the native and newcomer and a lot of the demographic shifts that are happening in our region too, I have found more often than not that there is more that we are similar than different.
No doubt.
And being able to speak to, build the trust by being curious of what excites you, what lights you on fire, what did you overcome, who are the people that you carry with you in your life and you're inspired by, what are the stories and values and virtues in other people that you find inspiring. And even if on the surface you look or work or are from a different generation, there's often a lot of commonalities of things that are timeless and that we see reflected in each other. And, I'm happy to share stories already in the first 90 days of my job of things that seem so different from each other actually have a lot of shared roots.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, I'm really curious to hear some of those that have risen to the top in your mind.
Yeah. Well, I think in the entrepreneurship space, oh gosh, I love being with entrepreneurs. Like the feeling of just possibility and grit and service and sacrifice.
And brilliance. And brilliance, man.
Absolutely. And I one of my first conversations was with one of our board members who was actually also one of our first loan clients. And he runs a family-owned, but really through his leadership, took it from an ag business into now a cleaning and detergent and all, like, so many other things that have spawned out of it too from West Concord. And he talked about how in the midst of the farm crisis, that was when they expanded their operation, their family business, into this massive enterprise. At the heart of what most people would see as like, oh, don't do any risk. And he talked to me about how his mom taught piano lessons as, the family was struggling to stay afloat during that time, and had put all the money that she had raised from the piano lessons into the equity portion for a loan from SMIF to be able to expand their work. And I was just so moved by this story of, faith, grit, forward thinking, and an ability to think of abundance in a time when all around you there's so much reason to think of scarcity, and to want to hold yourself up and think smaller because of the insecurities all around you, and the leap that he took. And then, fast forward several, decades now from that time in the 80s, almost 40 years later. And one of our visits when we went out to Albert Lee was with a couple, a Hispanic couple who, moved to the U.S. and had learned all these amazing trade skills from back home. And so as they were, getting accustomed to the community and whatnot, the husband ended up just using his shop to fix up other, some of his friends' cars. And they had this dream of being able to, be their own employer and entrepreneur. And now they've, through a loans from SMIF, have been able to expand way outside of their own garage, but are now one of the most impressive auto mechanics in the city. And hearing them talk about that same spirit of they were working multiple jobs. Also, I think easy to think of your life as I gotta just keep what I have, but to take that leap and that risk. To kind of put it on the line, to think about how can I grow this to where I want it to be. And they were saying that we didn't know anything about balance sheet and how to calculate depreciation costs. And I think what is really nice with SMIF is that we try to say, how do we get to yes, as opposed to, I think sometimes when there's not that relational aspect of banking and finance, it's you're only thinking about the scarcity and risk and what can go wrong. And when you take that entrepreneurial mindset of but how can I get it how can I get to where I need to be? And when you have a financing partner that's also how can we get you to where you need to be? The couple was literally talking through, it felt like I was back in an MBA class about understanding the fundamentals of depreciation, and to think from a 3-year time period, not knowing, really how to put together a balance sheet, to now being and then this is, then we understood that we needed to do this with our depreciation costs. And then that way we're not overpaying on X, Y, and Z. It was just amazing to see the knowledge and the competency and confidence you get from being able to know that you can do hard things and learn new things. And then to see them now so activated and connected to the community. They're part of the chamber. They're invited to all these other community events. And I think that's a little bit of, when you give and build something, your community also, which I think often happens in rural, rallies around you, and you become part of the fabric of a place. So that I think is just that relationship of, those two entrepreneurs, very different life stories, and yet I could see this commonality of refusing to think small and to have this grit and hunger about what can be done. And then the sense of belonging that they both feel, but then they exude outwards of now the sense of responsibility, what do I owe this place that has allowed me to make something of myself? And I think that's a thread of entrepreneurship that even if you're not, a new founder yourself, there's aspects of that of the confidence gain when you can build something and own it for yourself, that whether or not you're a founder, you can feel and embody that yourself.
Yep, there's no question about it. Well, you thread through all of your stories is something I certainly learned through my career in working with the Initiative Foundation and many other partners, and that is through the power of partnership, through the power of innovation. So many of these people, they end up working with others, and there is a lot of the power comes from convergence of ideas. What I mean by that is when we worked with the Initiative Foundation, all of them actually, over the course of the year, especially SMIF itself, we learned that as industries come together, as entrepreneurs come together, as organizations work with those entrepreneurs and companies and others, the real power is through convergence of concepts and ideas. That is where the power of healthcare, for example, and agriculture, when they come together, it's not just working together, but it's the convergence of innovation, where where things come alive. It's where the future is born. And so by watching all this and having invested in, hundreds of thousands in the Initiative Foundation, at least during my tenure, I think actually we exceeded $1 million. It was because the Initiative Foundation saw this innovation and convergence concept come alive. Mm-hmm. And by partnering dollars and time and effort in those, like you just explained through these two stories, you begin to see this grit and this power and this hunger and this toughness that you see so much in rural come alive. Mm-hmm. And then it creates something real and lasting, and it's based on the impact that it has on others. And that's the driver, that's the mission. And so we watch all of this occur, and you learn so much, and then you just sort of sit back over time, and you're just sort of like, whoa, I had no idea this is where it was headed.
Yeah.
But this is amazing. We had no idea when we began this partnership, this is what could come from it. Totally. I think that's the true power of the organization you lead. That's my view. Having worked with it for so long and so closely, and in your role, you're going to get a chance to sit back over time and just go, what the heck? That's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. What's happening here? It's fun. And I think that that's the best part of these kinds of stories, is we get to see more of that. So now you're beginning to formulate, I'm sure, a vision of where this all goes. Where are you taking this thing? What do you see in the future for Southern Minnesota? And you have a mission, but it has two components to it as well. But it seems to me like you see, I also get the sense you speak a little bit more theoretically about what you see as a possibility too, even beyond the mission itself. What does this look like to you?
Yeah. Well, another great example of that convergence, right? I think the innovation of today and tomorrow requires none of it is siloed. The way of thinking of compartmentalizing of, I'm a computer science person, I only do this X, Y, and Z. It's like to be competitive in STEM today means understanding how what you are doing applies to so many different other contexts. And one of my favorite site tours too was visiting Hormel Institute and also visiting the Destination Medical Center in Rochester. And the fact that there's already a partnership for the biosciences, right, between Hormel Institute and University of Minnesota in Rochester. Like they're sending these, postdocs into a world-renowned research institute that began first by researching lipids and fats and things that are maybe more like traditional to agriculture. But then out of Hormel Institute was also the findings from that was now powering the next stage of innovation for things like, how do we get a vaccine for COVID or and understand, they're going to be like, Benya, that was not the right scientific term, but being able to understand like how proteins work. So understanding then like how vaccines or different, medical interventions help change the character of a protein, right? Which then has so many applications into our medical sector. So I just want to, give an example of what that looks like of convergence happening right now, even in our region. And who would think that Rochester and Austin would have such a close relationship? Right. But to your question around what vision being put forward, I'm coming in right now on year 4 of a 5-year strategic plan. So come April, we will start on actually a full year of strategic planning and partnership with partners all across the region. And how I like to do strategic planning is not, doing it in a closed box or you're just thinking about all those things and then like all of a sudden the public just sees, here's what we've been thinking about for the past 6 months. Right. But I'd actually love starting now to think about how do we maybe invest in a few experiments and learn from those experiments and the outcomes of what worked or what didn't, leading into what will be our next strategic plan. So, some of the themes I will say that I'm really interested in that have to do with some of the future trends we're seeing in our region, right? Is one thing is like the demographic cliff we're experiencing. And it's not just Southern Minnesota, but my greatest fear is that with an aging population, we end up losing an entire generation of local businesses. And I think when you lose that sense of local ownership, either when businesses get bought up and then managed elsewhere, and the capital and the returns go elsewhere instead of being recirculated in our community, that it has so many downstream effects on our community's health and resources to fuel where our communities want to go. So I think one big thing is how do we get ahead of that demographic cliff? How are we working across sectors, including with higher ed, including with, we start at early childhood, but also it's a whole sort of cradle to career effort to say, how do we prepare the next generation of not just workforce, but entrepreneurs? And how might we think of entrepreneurship also as entrepreneurship through acquisition? Mm-hmm. So not just starting a new thing, but taking over and passing the torch, kind of in a metaphor way of, I think what's happening with me and Tim is like, how does that not just be a me and Tim thing, but like the lessons learned from how you pass things on be something that we can do across our region? So maybe that's on some of the economic development side. I'm also really interested in models of community ownership across not just businesses, but also how do we own back our main streets? How do we own key assets related to, like agricultural processing or things like that? Like how can we as a region identify what are the things that allow us to have this platform of economic growth because we own key aspects of what is in our community. And so more to come on that of what exactly that could look like. But, I think cooperative ownership has been the story of rural and of how rural has been able to compete in a changing economy. And I think there's a lot of key lessons to keep reminding ourselves of what has that looked like and how do we, as SMIF and as other financing partners, think of innovative financial tools to spur that on.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, this bucket of belonging. What does it mean to belong in our region? And how do we foster this sense of convergence, to use that theme of native and newcomer, and have this be a place where people know that they can thrive here in rural, and that they can know their neighbor, and that in times when things get scarce, we turn to each other instead of apart.
Yep. Agreed. What I like about what I just heard is through the process of experimentation, it's going to create ownership. So there'll be broad ownership of your mission work, ultimately through the results. And I think that that's going to be a really important component. Because again, it is easy for organizations to just come out and make a mission statement and say, here it is now, you guys. So y'all bought in?
Yeah.
And I think that this is more about really understanding what brings results. And I think that that's the other part of the process of working in rural is rural people are results driven.
Oh, yeah.
They need to see, all right, what is this doing here in our town? And I think the other challenge has been, as I've worked with you guys, we've learned together, the Initiative Foundation and Compere, at least through our roles, is that you've got to be able to bring together the power of local and region. And when you can really unleash region, when we're not competing with each other, but we're able to grow a region together, that it's a win for everybody, that's a good thing. So anyways, we have more conversations ahead, I think, in the future that we're going to need to get to. But this is a wonderful start. And again, congratulations. This is going to be an excellent tenure for you. It's going to be a great career for you. It's going to be a good career for the organization, for the region. So I'm excited to hear all about it. And it's wonderful to get to know you today. This is fantastic. So this is John Monson with Rural Ruckus Radio and Podcast signing off. We look forward to the next time. Have a great day.